I don't really know when I started noticing her. Maybe it was the way she held her keys too long before unlocking the door, or how she always tilted her head slightly when she laughed, like she didn't fully trust the sound. She wasn't just my friend's mom anymore. She was the woman across the hall, the one whose presence I felt even when the hallway was empty. The first real conversation happened in the laundromat downstairs. She was folding shirts, slow and deliberate, like each crease had to be right. I had headphones in, but no music playing. That was a habit of mine, pretending to listen, avoiding small talk. Still, she looked up. "You do that wrong," she said. Her tone wasn't sharp, just amused. I pulled one earbud out. "Do what?" "Fold towels. You're making a mess of it." I glanced at my pile, wrinkled, uneven, obviously careless. "Guess I've never had a teacher." "Lucky for you," she smiled. "I've got years of experience." It was nothing, just towels. But her hands brushed mine when she showed me how to fold the edges tighter, and I remember thinking, this is too close for how ordinary it is. I saw her differently after that. We'd bump into each other often, on the stairs, outside the building, sometimes at the corner cafe where I'd stop before work. She always ordered black tea, never coffee. She'd sit by the window, flipping through a paperback with the receipt still marking the first page. One morning, she caught me staring at her book instead of ordering. "You read?" she asked. "Not lately," I admitted. She nodded, like she already expected that answer. "Most people don't. But you look like you'd want to." I didn't know what to say to that. She had this way of talking that made silence feel like part of the conversation. My loneliness wasn't dramatic. It just filled the corners of my day. I had texts I never sent. Drafts that started with "Hey, you free?" but ended up deleted before I hit send. My phone was heavy with pauses. I worked, I came home, I scrolled, I slept. That was it. But she was a break in the pattern. Sometimes she'd knock on my door to borrow something small, a screwdriver, a flashlight, once even baking soda. Each time, she lingered in the doorway like she wasn't sure if she should step further in. I never asked. The line between noticing and wanting is thinner than I expected. One night, I was carrying groceries up the stairs when I heard her behind me. She reached out, steadying a bag that was about to slip. Her hand stayed there, just a moment too long, fingers brushing the back of mine. "Careful," she said softly. I swallowed the reply that almost came out. Something about how her touch felt steadier than the groceries. Instead, I just nodded, pretending the weight was the only thing I noticed. The moment I'll never forget came a week later. It was late. I'd left my laundry basket downstairs and went to grab it before bed. She was there again, leaning against the dryer, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, surprised but not embarrassed, like she'd been waiting for something but didn't know what. "You won't mention this to him, right?" she asked suddenly, referring to my friend, her son. "Mention what?" I asked, genuinely confused. Her lips curved, not quite a smile. She shook her head, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Then, quiet enough that I almost doubted I heard it. "This stays between us." And just like that, the air changed. I carried the basket upstairs, heart louder than my footsteps, replaying her words until I wasn't sure if she'd meant anything at all. But I knew I wouldn't forget them. The thing about her words, "this stays between us," was that they didn't fade. I carried them like a pebble in my shoe, small but impossible to ignore. Every time I passed her door, I heard them again. Sometimes I wondered if she remembered saying it at all. A few days later, we ended up in the stairwell together. She was juggling 2 grocery bags and her keys. I offered to help, but she shook her head. "You already saved me from collapsing towels," she said. I smiled. "That's a service I charge for, by the way." She raised an eyebrow, lips twitching. "Send me the invoice, then." The banter was nothing. Still, her voice lingered in my head even after I went back inside. I could almost hear her laugh echoing in the narrow stairwell, soft and amused, like it had nowhere better to be. Later that week, she knocked on my door. It was raining outside, and her umbrella was broken, the handle bent. "Do you have tape?" she asked. I found some, and we sat on my kitchen floor, trying to fix the umbrella like it was a puzzle we both knew wouldn't last. She held the handle steady while I wrapped the tape around it, our knees almost touching. You'd think by 46 I'd have my life more together than this, she said suddenly. Her tone was light, but the way she avoided my eyes told me it wasn't really a joke. You seem pretty together to me, I said. She gave me a look I couldn't quite read, part disbelief, part something else. Then she whispered, "You sound young when you say that." The words stung more than I expected. Young. Like I didn't know what I was talking about. Maybe I didn't. But she didn't push me away either. Her hand stayed close to mine as I smoothed the last strip of tape down. When she left, the umbrella still crooked, I kept staring at the floor where she'd been sitting. The next evening, I saw her outside, smoking on the balcony. I didn't even know she smoked. She caught me looking up from the sidewalk and, instead of hiding the cigarette, lifted her hand in a small wave. I hesitated, then lifted mine back. That night, I imagined walking upstairs, stepping onto that balcony, asking her why she looked so far away when she stared out at the street. I imagined what it would feel like to stand next to her, the quiet thick between us. But I didn't move. A few days later, I finally did something small. I brought her a thermos of tea. I'd remembered she always ordered black tea at the cafe. "Thought you might like this," I said, awkwardly holding it out in the hallway. She blinked, then took it. "You remembered." Her voice was softer than usual, like the tea wasn't the only thing warming her hands. "I try," I muttered. She looked at me for a long moment. Too long. Then she stepped back into her apartment, leaving the door half open. "Come in for a minute," she said. Her place looked lived in, but not cluttered. A book half finished on the couch, a sweater draped over the armrest, a framed photo turned slightly toward the wall. I didn't ask about it. We sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea from mismatched mugs. The silence wasn't heavy, it was something else. Something that made me notice the way she cradled her cup, or how her thumb tapped against the handle when she was lost in thought. "My son used to drink from this one," she said suddenly, holding up her mug. "He said it made the tea taste better." I froze. He was my friend, who probably had no idea his mom was sitting here with me, letting the evening stretch too long. "You miss him," I said quietly. She nodded, eyes fixed on the steam rising from her drink. More than I say out loud. There it was, the truth she'd given me, small but heavy. Something she probably wouldn't have told anyone else. When I left that night, she walked me to the door. I muttered a thanks, not just for the tea. She reached out suddenly, brushing lint from my sleeve. It was nothing. A motherly gesture, maybe. But the way her hand lingered a second too long, that stayed with me. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The next time we met, it wasn't planned. It never was. She was waiting for the elevator, balancing a grocery bag on her hip, scrolling through her phone with her thumb. I almost didn't say anything, but she noticed me first. "You're late," she said. "For what?" Her lips curved. "Everything." I laughed softly, too softly, then followed her into the elevator. The doors closed, and the small space pressed our shoulders closer than they should have been. I wanted to say something. Anything, but the numbers ticking upward filled the silence instead. When the doors opened, we both hesitated before stepping out, like the spell had been broken. That weekend, I knocked on her door with an excuse, something about borrowing foil. She let me in, moving around the kitchen with a kind of practiced grace. "You always show up when I'm making tea," she said, setting the kettle down. "Maybe I just know the schedule," I replied, but it came out quieter than I intended. She didn't answer, just poured hot water into 2 mugs, slid one across the counter. We drank in silence. Not uncomfortable, more like both of us were waiting for the other to break it. Then, footsteps in the hall. A key turning in the lock next door. My friend's voice, muffled but unmistakable, talking to someone on the phone. Her hand froze around her mug. She didn't look at me, but the tension in her shoulders was sharp enough to cut. "You should," she started. "Yeah," I said quickly, already standing. I left without finishing the tea, without saying goodbye. For days after, we didn't see each other. Or maybe we avoided each other. I wasn't sure. I caught myself listening for her footsteps in the hallway, for the faint sound of a kettle boiling behind her door. Nothing. When I finally saw her again, it was at the cafe. She was alone at her usual table, fingers brushing the rim of her mug. I almost kept walking. Instead, I ordered my coffee and sat across from her before I could second guess it. You disappeared, I said. She gave a small shrug. Busy. I nodded, though I didn't believe it. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away. I thought maybe. I started, but couldn't finish. Thought what? I shook my head, staring at my untouched coffee. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The hum of the cafe carried on without us, the hiss of milk steaming, a spoon clinking against a saucer. Finally, she leaned forward slightly, her voice low. You shouldn't look at me like that. I froze. My mouth opened, then closed again. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a second I thought something was about to happen. The kind of moment you can't take back. Her hand twitched, like she almost reached for mine. Almost. Instead, she pulled back, her chair scraping softly against the floor. I should go. And just like that, she was gone, leaving me with coffee gone cold and a silence that felt heavier than any words that it was late afternoon when I found her sitting on the bench outside our building. The air was cool, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. She had her phone in her lap, unread messages glowing faintly on the screen, but her eyes weren't on them. I almost kept walking, but then she looked up. Sit, she said, her voice too casual to be casual. I sat. The bench was small, our shoulders almost touching. You always come back from work looking like you've forgotten something, she said, not looking at me. Maybe I have. She nodded once, a small tilt of the head, as if that answer confirmed something she already knew. For a while, we just watched people pass. The neighbor's kid on a scooter, a man carrying groceries, a couple holding hands without noticing they were. Ordinary things. But none of it felt ordinary. Then she said, quietly, my son might come visit next month. The words landed harder than I expected. I swallowed, trying not to let it show. That's good, I managed. Is it? She asked, finally turning to look at me. Her eyes were sharp, almost searching. I didn't answer right away. She filled the silence herself. You two haven't talked in a while, have you? No, I admitted. She leaned back, sighing. He'd be furious if he knew we even sat like this. The air between us tightened. I shifted, hands gripping my knees. We're not doing anything wrong. She gave me a long look. Not angry, worse. Sad. You think he'd see it that way? I didn't answer. We sat like that, the silence stretching, until she whispered, sometimes I forget how young you are. The words burned. I wanted to argue, to tell her I wasn't as young as she thought, that I'd lived enough, seen enough, that loneliness doesn't care about numbers. But instead, all I managed was, I hate when you say that. Her eyes softened. Why? Because it makes me feel like you'll never take me seriously. The confession hung there, exposed, raw. I could hear my own breath, uneven in the quiet. She looked away, biting the inside of her cheek. Her hand tightened around her phone until the screen went dark. You don't know what you're asking for, she said. I'm not asking, I whispered. She turned back, startled, like she hadn't expected me to say it. The street grew quieter as the evening settled. A lamppost flickered on nearby, throwing a pale circle of light around the bench. I felt like we were trapped inside it. Finally, she spoke again. I used to think I wanted someone to see me. Just see me, past everything else. The years, the mistakes, She stopped herself, shaking her head. But when it happens, it's terrifying. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. Her hand rested on the bench between us, close enough that I could feel the warmth of it. My fingers twitched, wanting to close the gap. You're not terrified now? I asked. Her mouth curved, not quite a smile. I don't know what I am. It would have been easy, right then, to lean in, to touch her hand, to erase the space that had been haunting us since that first folded towel. I almost did, but she drew in a slow breath, steadying herself. We can't, she stopped. Looked at me again, her eyes softer now, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. I leaned forward, just enough for her to notice, not enough to close the distance. Her breath caught. The silence was unbearable. My heart was a drum in my chest, loud enough I was sure she could hear it. Then she asked, voice barely audible, what do you think happens if we don't stop? The question she left me with, what happens if we don't stop, echoed for days. I replayed it while brushing my teeth, while staring at the ceiling at night, while walking past her door in the morning. It wasn't a warning, not exactly. More like she'd cracked the window open, then closed it before I could step through. But then she pulled back. I didn't see her on the bench anymore. No tea kettle sounds through the wall. No footsteps in the hallway at the same time as mine. It was as if she'd erased herself from my daily routes. Careful, deliberate. I told myself not to notice. But I noticed. The first time I saw her again, she was outside, standing by her car with a man I didn't recognize. Older, graying hair, suit jacket slung over his shoulder. They spoke quietly, too far for me to hear, but close enough to sting. He touched her arm once, briefly. Not intimate, but enough to anchor 1,000 thoughts in my chest. I ducked back inside before she could see me. That night, I couldn't stop imagining the conversation. Was he an ex? A colleague? Someone who still had a claim on her? I hated myself for the jealousy, but it came anyway, sharp and sour. I almost knocked on her door, stood outside with my fist half raised, heart hammering. But I didn't. The next morning, her umbrella leaned against the wall outside her door, broken again, still taped from the night we'd fixed it. Proof she hadn't gone far. Proof she was still here. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to ring the bell. When she finally appeared in the stairwell, it was like nothing had happened. She carried a bag of groceries, nodded once. "Hi," I said. "Hi." That was it. No smile. No folded towel joke. Just a single syllable, placed carefully between us like a wall. I wanted to ask about the man. I wanted to ask why she'd been avoiding me. I wanted to ask if she still thought about that question on the bench. But her eyes stayed fixed on the steps, and I swallowed it all. The days blurred after that. Work, laundry, scrolling through my phone at night. Drafts of messages I never sent. "Are you okay? Did I do something? Do you want me to leave you alone?" Each one deleted before my thumb touched send. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. One evening, I found myself at the cafe again. I chose a seat by the window, the same one she always sat at. The tea in front of me went cold while I watched the door, half hoping she'd walk in, half dreading it. She didn't. Instead, a woman with her laugh walked by outside, and for a split second my chest lifted, only to fall again when I realized it wasn't her. Later that week, I saw her car pull into the lot. I almost went out, almost waved. Instead, I stood behind the curtain in my apartment, watching her sit there a few minutes longer than necessary, hands still on the steering wheel. She looked tired, not just physically, tired in the way people get when they're carrying something too heavy, too long. I wondered if she was thinking about me, or if I was just another weight to set down. The night ended like so many others, me staring at my phone, the empty text box waiting. "This stays between us," she had said. But lately, it felt like she was making sure there was no us at all. I typed the words, "I miss you," and then I erased them. The screen went dark. The message stayed unsent. It was raining the night. Everything broke open. Not a storm, just steady rain that made the pavement shine under the streetlights. I came home late, tired, carrying leftovers in a paper bag. Her umbrella, the broken, taped one, was propped outside her door again, dripping on the mat. I hesitated, then knocked. The door opened slowly. She stood there barefoot, sweater sleeves pushed up, the soft smell of tea drifting out. She looked at me like she'd been expecting someone else. Or no one at all. "Hi," I said. Her eyes dropped to the bag in my hand. "Dinner. Leftovers," I admitted. "Too much for one person." She paused, then stepped back. "Come in." Her kitchen light was warm, humming faintly. We sat at the table with mismatched plates. I slid half the food toward her. She took a bite, smiled faintly. "You order the same thing every time," she said. "You notice too much," I replied. Silence after that. The kind where both of us wanted to say something, but neither did. The rain filled the gaps. "Finally," I said it. "You've been avoiding me." Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. She set it down, carefully. I thought it was better. "For who?" She exhaled, long and tired. "For you. For me. For everyone." I shook my head, fingers tightening around my glass. "You don't get to decide that." Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp, almost defensive. But then they softened. "You don't understand what this costs." The words hung there. Costs. like she'd already done the math, weighted against something I couldn't see. I don't care, I said, but too fast, too eager. She tilted her head, almost smiling. That's because you're young enough to think you don't. I felt the sting again, the word young cutting in. I wanted to argue, to tell her she wasn't just my friend's mom, wasn't just older, wasn't just some line I'd tripped over. But the words tangled before they reached my mouth. Instead, I said quietly, I just don't want to feel like this is nothing. Her hands, resting on the table, went still. She didn't look away. It isn't nothing. The relief hit and hurt at the same time. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. We sat there, the weight of it pressing down, but not crushing. Just enough to make everything sharp. Her hands on the table, the sound of rain, the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, she spoke again. He's coming back next week. I swallowed. Your son. She nodded. If he saw us like this, her voice trailed off. I wanted to say we're just eating dinner. But we both knew it wasn't just dinner. Not anymore. Her eyes searched mine, as if waiting for me to flinch. Instead, I leaned forward slightly. Not touching, not crossing, but close enough that the air shifted. I'm not asking for anything, I whispered. Just don't shut me out. Her lips parted, then closed again. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. Slowly, carefully, she reached across the table. Her fingers brushed the back of mine. Barely a touch. The kind of gesture no one else would notice. The kind of gesture I'd remember forever. We stayed like that for a while, her hand resting lightly against mine, the rain softening outside. Neither of us moved further. Neither of us pulled away. Finally, she whispered, I don't know how this ends. I shook my head. Me neither. Silence again. But this time, it didn't feel like a wall. More like a space we were both standing in, unsure of the next step. She smiled then, small and tired but real. Okay, she said. And for the first time, I believe that word was enough. Time didn't stop after that night in her kitchen. It didn't explode into something cinematic either. It just shifted. We settled into a rhythm, quiet, deliberate. Not every day, not every night, but enough. A knock on my door when her kettle was on. A text at 8:47 a.m., just a photo of her tea mug with no caption. Sometimes I'd reply with my coffee cup, black, steam curling in the morning light. Little signals. Our way of saying I'm here without saying it out loud. Her son did visit, like she said he would. The week before, she grew distant again, retreating into herself. I understood. For those days, I kept away, even when I wanted to knock. Even when I heard her moving around late at night, restless. When he finally left, she knocked on my door. No words. Just set her thermos down on my counter and leaned against it, exhausted. I poured us both tea, her way, strong, no sugar, and we sat in silence. I didn't ask how it went. She didn't explain. The fact that she came was enough. Sometimes we sat on the same bench outside the building, the one where she'd first asked me the question that haunted me for weeks. The one under the lamppost that flickered at dusk. We didn't always talk. Sometimes she read while I scrolled. Sometimes she smoked and I pretended not to notice. Once, she said, I used to hate that bench. Always felt like I was waiting for something that never came. I glanced at her. And now? She exhaled slowly, not quite smiling. Now it feels less lonely. It wasn't perfect. She still pulled back sometimes, especially when memories or guilt caught her off guard. I still wrestled with the weight of being seen as young and proven. But the tension no longer fractured us. It softened us. Like we'd learned how to sit with it, instead of run from it. I noticed how she always folded napkins neatly, even at cafes. I started doing it too, without thinking. She teased me once. See? You learn. I shrugged, but I caught her watching me with something quiet in her eyes. Something she didn't have to say. One evening, we walked home from the cafe together. The street was damp, reflecting the lights above. She carried her book in one hand, her umbrella in the other. The same broken one, still taped, stubbornly kept alive. You should buy a new one, I told her. She shook her head. This one works. Mostly. We both laughed, the sound small but easy. At the building's entrance, she stopped. For a second I thought she might retreat into the same old hesitation. But instead, She slipped her hand into mine, briefly, as if testing the weight. Not clinging, not confessing, just being. And for me, that was enough. Months passed. Seasons turned. We weren't a secret anymore, not really. But we weren't a declaration either. We were just together. In the way she poured 2 mugs instead of 1. In the way I saved a seat across from her at the cafe without asking. I never forgot that first time. The laundromat, her teaching me to fold towels, our hands brushing in something that wasn't supposed to mean anything. Funny how the smallest gestures stay. Now, sometimes at 8:47 a.m., when the world is barely awake, she'll send me nothing more than a photo of her tea mug. And I'll reply with my coffee cup, black. No words. Just a quiet thread between us, stretched across a day that might otherwise feel empty. It's not grand. It's not loud. But it's ours. And that's enough.